7. No, do not offer me your white hand and try to hold me back. I do not feel your paltry fear. I am a poet, and poets relish velvet shadow and its secret kiss. Why else would I live in this old valley town, haunted as it is by mystic history? No, take away your hand and let me walk down the road that hies me to the great hill. Ah, you follow, do you? Then make no mortal sound, for I relish the supernatural hush of this spectral hour. Look at the late afternoon sky and the scene before us, looking so like that painting by the American modernist Albert Bloch, his 1938 piece entitled Rutted Road. Look, there is the stone wall at our left, and the forlorn farmhouse with its spiral of smoke reaching for the misty grey-blue sky. Here and there stand the isolated trees naked of foliage, some living and some deceased. Another wall begins on our right-hand side, an ancient thing composed of rough-hewn stone much darker than the bleached rocks with which the farmer's wall has been constructed. It contains a curious aura, doesn't it? This centuried wall that stretches before us into the place where mist thickens into fog. And there, half hidden by the fog, Zamon's Hill, the forbidden place, with its dome rising to meet the gathering darkness of early nightfall. Listen, do you hear it? The cry of the crow. There it flies, over us and toward the blanketed hilltop, our psychopomp escorting us to another realm, where we will dine on occult things. Ah, there's your white hand again, but this time it seeks comfort of companionship, so as to alleviate your fear. Let me wrap my black fingers around it as, together, we trod across this esplanade toward the haunted hill. There, the clean white steeple of your god. Do you wish to step inside and grovel on your knees? Or shall we continue on our way through this blanket of fog and up the tall and wooded hill, where perhaps we can encounter another deity to whom we can whisper lamentations? Come then, and climb, and thus approach the level where wind begins to whisper 2 centuries of secrets. Look there, our psychopomp the crow, dead and mangled on this green and wooded plot. But still it guides, with the wing that is unbroken and points upward to the place that has summoned. How like a lost boy you look with your wide eyes and pale mouth. I shall tighten my hold on your white hand and lure you upward, to the place that awaits your mortal foot. The path grows steep, and the fog begins to thin as we reach the end of woodland and emerge into a time of newborn twilight. Look there, my child, below us. See the muted lights of human habitation through the churning mist. How far away humanity seems now, from this place that we have reached near the crest of a great hill. Forget that paltry light of human habitation, for there beyond us is another illumination, phosphorescent and unearthly, kissed by lunar radiance that shines down upon the ruins before us. Your hand is in my own. Do not hold back. Turn your eyes away from that veil of mortal memory. Press your foot upon the path that leads us to the place of buried lore and ghastly ceremony. Smell the wind that brings the stench of Dunwich 2 miles hence, and watch that wind frolic with my abundance of red hair. Smell the rot of some madness out of time that would split dimension and spill onto our eyes. What wonders would our eyes then perceive? Feel the cold moonlight that would drown us with keen lunacy. Help me free myself from this bodice of my yellow gown. Rip it with your hot white hands. Allow my manumitted tits, no longer slaves of modesty, to point their nipples to the moon. Nestle your white face between my breasts as your savage hands continue their destruction of my dress. Then sink onto your knees and worship the moist aroma of my sex. Kiss there with your prosaic mouth. Bollocks. Kiss me there with your prosaic mouth, but do not work your phallus yet. You must remain a virgin 1 moment more. Take my black hand, child, do not hold back. Let me lead you to the altar stone where dull dead stains remember when they were new and moist and darkly crimson. Kneel here with me before this altar on Zaman's hill, in this place of ruin and remorse. Let me embrace you with my black arms as my dark mouth sighs whispers into that cavity, your ear. The wind continues to move and moan and pitch my length of hair so as to blanket your frail white mortality. Rise and moan with me upon this altar stone. Let me straddle you and rip my nails into your pale white flesh. Ah, how your wet red liquid fuels my appetite as it coats this altar stone. Yes, let it lift, my child, your aching phallus, plunge it deep within me as we ride the night wind with ghoulish delight. Let my rich red hair blanket you as I ravage what remains of your soul. Pump and pant, my pet. Part your paltry human lips, and gasp in pain as the hill explodes with wondrous sound. Watch with gluttonous eyes the blood that floods the lunatic moon, the moon that illuminates my charnel hunger, my jaws stretched wide. 8. He had climbed the hill from which he could look down and study the ghostly seaport that had such a strange underground legend. One could well understand the whispers told of shadowed Innsmouth, for from this high point it looked like a huddled haunt in which nothing had dwelt for decades. The sunset had been spectacular, but as twilight approached he saw that there were no lights twinkling in the old town, which spread below like some lightless necropolis. The only movement was that of the waves, of the sea that shook what remained of the rotting wharves, and the movement of thickened shadow as daylight died. At last he picked up his bicycle and rode down the trail that took him to the harbour, where the ancient winds brought evil smells from the sea and mingled with the sickening stench of Innsmouth town. The rain, when it began to fall, chilled his flesh but did nothing to dissipate the odour of sea and dilapidation, and so he continued his trek to the centre of town, where he found at last the darkened shop that was his destination. Leaning his bike beside the weathered wall, he wiped away the rain that streamed into his eyes and peered through the murky glass. But all that he could discern was a tenebrous realm filled with curious forms, with here and there twisting columns that threatened to tilt and collapse. Bending away from the window, he raised his face to the rainfall and drank an effluvium of tainted sky, and then he stepped to the narrow door and entered the shop, instantly beguiled by how the air was altered, how his nostrils were pleased with age-old fragrance that dispelled the grotesque stench he had encountered outside. It was subtle, this new aroma, but he thought he could detect a variety of spices, plus the distinct smell of olden books. It was the smell of books that reminded him of his mission. An abstruse source of illumination came from one corner of the room, and when he walked toward it he saw what looked like a very old lantern that sat on a glass case, its circle of easy light not filtering beyond that particular corner of the room. He walked past the twisted pillars that proved to be columns of piled books, reaching to the low ceiling, from which decorative webs descended so as to cover antique lamps and items brought in from alien shores. His hands pushed away a tracery of dusty web from the glass of the case in which he beheld the book whose existence had been whispered to him in Arkham. Then he heard movement from a distant place, and looking up he saw the creature that stalked toward the circle of light. She entered the radiance, the tall black woman with lengthy coils of burnished red hair that hung to the waistline of her yellow gown. He was astounded at her handsomeness, and wondered that a woman with skin so black was devoid of any sign of negroid features. She seemed to him like some supernal goddess of Arabia, who, although in mortal disguise, could not dissemble her cosmic sovereignty. There was something haughty and proud in her magnificent face, and he felt flattered when she deigned to smile at him and speak. "What is your desire?" "To look upon the sign." Her smile altered strangely, and her breath, as she pushed it to him, was filled with the intoxicating fragrance that he had detected upon entering the shop. "And what is the gift that will then be exposed?" "I will know the satanic glory of what it means to be a god." His voice was calm, but his hands, upon the glass of the display case, trembled. His eyes, bewitched, watched her reach into the case and bring forth the large book, from which another scent arose, one that he could not comprehend. Perhaps it was the effluvia of antediluvian sorcery, decayed yet potent still. He backed away a little as the smell reached into his nostrils and crept toward his brain, and then he blinked as his eyesight dimmed. Vaguely he could see her delicate hands open the book. The golden symbol was blurred, but as he blinked his stinging eyes, it took on solid form. It was a yellow sign, and it possessed him utterly. He watched with eyes on fire as the goddess curled her black fingers around the sentient glyph and raised it over her amazing face. He watched, enchanted, as the symbol's 3 tails mutated with shaping, until the thing became a triple crown composed of gold-white lava. He saw how its liquid light spilled over the place where the goddess had worn a magnificent face, but where there was now naught but a featureless mask of obsidian blackness. Her hands, unaltered and amazing, reached for his face and tugged it to the triple crown. As he peered into its potency, he knew for one brief moment what it meant to be a god, a creature bereft of heart and soul, merciless and mighty. The beautiful hands brought his face nearer to one spire of the sign, until his eye was pressed against it. Ah, how his eyes boiled and turned black as his flesh began to flake as ash! From some place within the void that was her face, an orifice opened, and the goddess blew his dust away. 9. Returning to the place that smelled of olden days, I staggered through the mortal throngs and sought the lonesome place, until I came to the leprous wharves that so infected my imagination. It was not only the coils of mist that rose from water, but the sound of those waves as they slapped the rotting wood of dilapidated piers. It was a noise that felt like liquid footfalls on my brain, the tread of something trying to infiltrate my fevered fancy. From some distant indiscernible place I heard the baying of a vessel's horn, a noise so mutated by the ether that it sounded like some monstrous chanting to strange gods, and it was accompanied by the unhallowed gongs that were the clanging of moored buoys floating in some shoal. I walked away from the wharves and past the foreboding shop wherein I had found the ancient book, continuing to a network of alleys through which I hobbled, seeking the lonesome place that had been indicated on the curious map that I had found. Windowless walls tilted over me, their roofs almost touching, and I felt covered by a canopy of rotted wood and displaced time. I kept my hands in pockets, so as not to be tempted to touch the stagnant walls that were wet with slime that caught and reflected darkness. I saw it then, before me in a secret plot of land, the black courtyard that I sought. Edging through filthy shadow, I touched the cold metal of the gate, and then I pushed the gate and passed through the threshold. How queer that I expected someone to be awaiting me, from whose lips would be uttered the mysteries of the worm. But I was alone, and the one whispered sound that could be heard was the weird low song of wind in trees, and that was such a lonesome noise that, pursing my lips, I whistled in uneasy accompaniment. And then it was that a dim light illuminated the place before me, the mouldy house of another era, where in one window I discerned an eerie glow. And from that window I heard a whistled sound that seemed to be an answer to my own, a noise that beckoned me forward, past a little pond in which glazed eyeballs seemed to study me. I approached the black wall and slanting roof, from which diseased vegetation grew, and as I peered into the window, I saw the dancing swarm of headless things that moved in time to a song of wind and distant rhythmic buoys. I watched them raise their handless arms and slap their wrists together as they danced. And then I perceived the thing around which they moved, the gigantic yellow mask that fumbled on the floor, inching its way like some diseased worm as its black lips puckered and exhaled a ghastly chirrup of airy lamentation. I tilted as I fell to weakened knees upon soft ground and cried a call that seemed to inspire the dancing things to more feverish movement. The lifeless light behind them cast their horrid shadows on my brow, and I fancied I could feel their fantastic forms melt into my eyes and find my brain, into which they capered as arcane beasts, eager to endow my mind with ceremonial task. I wept for the headless things, because I knew that I would never taste their diabolic kisses, would never feel the trembling of their missing hands upon my face and in my hair. However, I felt the vibration of the yellow mask that had won their veneration, and I sensed its hunger to suck my boiling brain from out its dungeon, my smooth skull, to feast upon my head and hand so that I could join its throng of revellers. But I will not limp into that realm where human hope is demurred, for I have lips with which to breathe the arcane song that frolics in my mind, the tune that coaxes the yellow mask to lift into the air and float before my face, which it would eat. I still have hands, with fingers that are ripe for ripping, and nails with which to shred a yellow mask and plant its tattered remnants into the necks where heads have been mercilessly severed. I watch them move as, now, the yellow moon reveals her face within the window of the room, and with language learned from arcane books I blend that lunar light with sentient shadow, so as to construct artificial hands onto the severed wrists that writhe around me. They watch me, my adoring horde, with artificial faces as I move my hands in symbolic fashion to the dead lunar light, and they lift their dummy hands so as to impersonate mine own with movement that is reflecting on the surface of the moon. We howl with wonder as the yellow moon assumes an expression that delights our morbid souls. I heave my whistled song into the air, accompanied by the things that whistle around me with those objects that have replaced their mortal mouths. They warble their puppet song into the cosmic darkness, and dance in the light of moon, remembering when they were living things. Nourished by necromancy, I join in their dance.